Tom Jennings was a man of routine. Each morning, he woke up to the sound of his alarm, grabbed a cup of coffee, and dressed for another day in the office. His life was predictable, stable, a rhythm that soothed him. That was until, one ordinary Thursday, his boss called. "Tom, I need to see you. It's important," came the terse voice on the other end of the line. The words alone sent a chill down his spine, the first crack in the familiar walls of his day. Why did his boss suddenly want a meeting? What could be so urgent? Tom tried to push away the unsettling thought, but the anticipation of what awaited him lingered. Something was different, and he couldn't quite shake the feeling that this small break in his routine might be the beginning of something much bigger. Tom walked into the meeting with his usual apprehension, expecting criticism, or perhaps a new project thrust upon him. Instead, his boss, Mr. Harris, surprised him by smiling. "You've been working hard, Tom. Take the rest of the day off. I'm giving you some time for yourself." The words didn't make sense. After all, when did a boss give time off for no reason? A surge of relief washed over him, but it was quickly tempered by an unsettling sense of suspicion. Why now? Still, he pushed the thought aside, making plans for the afternoon. He decided to pick up his wife, Julia, from work, something he hadn't done in months. Maybe he could surprise her with a small gesture, remind her of the man she'd married. As he thought about her, however, a subtle unease tugged at him. Lately things had felt off between them. She seemed distant, distracted, always busy. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was a growing gap that neither of them acknowledged. Shaking his head, Tom pushed these thoughts aside, eager to see her, to make things right. When Tom arrived at Julia's office, he noticed something was immediately off. She wasn't waiting outside like usual. He pulled into the parking lot, scanning for her. After a moment, he saw her exit the building, her eyes darting nervously around the lot as she hurried toward the car. When she slid into the passenger seat, her face was pale, her movements quick and jerky. Tom glanced over, trying to mask his concern. "Hey babe, how's your day been?" he asked casually, trying to sound normal. But Julia didn't meet his eyes. She stared straight ahead, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Fine," she mumbled, her voice sounding strained. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she pulled her skirt down hurriedly, her behavior grew even more peculiar. Was she hiding something? Why was she avoiding him like this? The silence in the car felt heavier with each passing second, suffocating. He tried to make small talk, but Julia remained distant, her responses short and clipped. When they arrived home, she rushed inside without a word, not even looking at him. The strange tension lingered, and Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something he wasn't yet ready to understand. Once inside the house, Tom's unease grew into something sharper, more pointed. He couldn't stop thinking about Julia's strange behavior earlier. When she went upstairs to change, he decided to tidy up a bit, his mind still swirling with questions. That's when he noticed something odd. As she had climbed out of the car, Tom had caught a glimpse of her stockings, ripped in the back. He hadn't said anything at the time, assuming it was just an accident. But now, as he picked up a pile of her clothes, he noticed something else. Julia wasn't wearing underwear. His breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. Was this a sign of something more? Tom couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. Had she been unfaithful? It was a thought that had crossed his mind before, but he had always dismissed it. Now, however, the evidence was mounting. The little things, the late nights, her unexplained absences, the subtle shift in her behavior, had all been building to this moment. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Tom's heart pounded as he recalled the growing distance between them over the past few months. Julia had become less affectionate, more secretive. She'd stopped telling him about her day, always finding excuses to avoid spending time together. He couldn't deny it any longer. Something had shifted in their marriage, and he was determined to find out what. Determined to uncover the truth, Tom took matters into his own hands. The next day, he rifled through Julia's things, looking for any clue that might explain her strange behavior. Her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, unlocked. Hesitantly, Tom picked it up, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through her messages. It was in her call log that he found something that made his stomach churn, a number that appeared frequently, more than he cared to count. There was no name attached to it, but the repeated contact over the past few months stood out like a red flag. His pulse quickened. Who was this person? What did they want with his wife? Tom's thoughts spiraled, but he wasn't going to make any assumptions just yet. He needed to confront this person, find out what was really going on. Tom dialed the number, his heart racing as he listened to the phone ring. A voice on the other end picked up, but when Tom asked to meet, the person quickly refused. "I don't know who you are, but this isn't your business," they snapped before hanging up. Frustrated but resolute, Tom knew he had to get to the bottom of this. He couldn't let it go. As he hung up, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he got them. Tom's patience was wearing thin. He had spent days tracking the number, trying to figure out who Julia had been talking to. Finally, he got a lead. The man would be near her office again, and Tom was ready. He waited, heart pounding, watching the entrance of the building. His eyes scanned every figure that passed by, looking for the man he needed to confront. Then he saw him. Tall, dark hair, casually dressed. Tom's instincts kicked in. He walked toward the man with purpose, his steps deliberate, his fists clenched. When they were face to face, Tom didn't waste time. "What's going on with you and my wife?" he demanded, his voice sharp, filled with anger and hurt. The man looked surprised but tried to remain calm. "Stay out of it," he muttered, trying to back away. That was all it took to snap the final thread of Tom's composure. He grabbed the man by the collar, pushing him against the wall. "You don't get to walk away from this," Tom spat, his voice low and full of rage. The other man struggled, but Tom wasn't about to back down. The confrontation turned physical quickly, a blur of fists and anger. Eventually, the man gave up, stumbling backward, eyes wide with fear. Tom stood over him, breathing heavily, his hands shaking. He was done. Without saying another word, Tom turned and walked away. He didn't need any more answers. He knew what he had to do next. When Tom returned home, the weight of his actions settled in. The anger that had fueled him during the confrontation now left him empty, exhausted. He couldn't look at Julia the same way anymore. Not after what he'd learned. Not after what he'd seen. He changed the locks on the front door, packing her things into boxes as he went. The finality of it hit him like a wave, but he didn't falter. Julia tried to get inside, her face a mix of desperation and guilt. "Tom, please, I can explain," she begged, but he wouldn't let her in. "Number, it's over," he said firmly, his voice cold and steady. She argued, tried to manipulate him, but Tom had no interest in listening anymore. The trust was broken beyond repair. With one final look at her, he closed the door, sealing off the past and all its lies. The divorce was finalized quickly, and Tom found himself moving through life in a haze, his mind still grappling with the devastation of everything that had happened. He reflected on the years he'd spent with Julia, trying to piece together what went wrong. At first, the pain was overwhelming, the loss of trust too deep to ignore. But as time passed, he realized that it wasn't all bad. He had been freed from a marriage that had been draining him, emotionally and mentally. Tom spent more time with his family, reconnecting with those who had been there for him when Julia had become a stranger. Slowly, he began to heal. The numbness that had gripped him started to fade, replaced by a quiet hope. Looking ahead, Tom knew that he was ready for something new, something better. He wasn't sure when or how, but he believed in the possibility of a future filled with trust and honesty. He was done with the lies. This time he'd be careful. The next person he trusted would have to earn it, and Tom was ready to give his heart to someone who would value it. Tom stood at the edge of a new chapter, feeling lighter than he had in years. He had made the hard choice, the right choice, and although the pain of the past lingered, he knew he was better off without it. Julia's betrayal had torn him apart, but in the end, it had made him stronger. He had learned to trust his instincts, to stand up for himself, and to demand respect. The road ahead was uncertain, but Tom was no longer afraid. He had faced the worst and come out on the other side. The future, while unknown, now felt full of possibility. With newfound strength and wisdom, he was ready for whatever came next. This was just the beginning.